Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for coming to our event. My name is Colleen Heim, and I'm the director of the Healthy Blair County Coalition. And if you're not familiar with who we are, there's our flyer in the back, and it kind of describes who we are, some of our work groups, how you can get involved. But for the most part, we develop the community health needs assessment for our local hospitals and all of our community partners. And then we develop programs and strategies and trainings based on some of the needs that have risen to the top. So every 3 years, we send out 3,000 random household surveys. We survey all of our key leaders, our service providers, members of our faith-based community. And so I'm not really sure if we were surprised or not, but 77% of residents listed addiction to cell phones, internet, scamming, social media as the #1 concern that they had in the county. They had a choice of about 43 different items. And so with the fact that that was identified as one of the top issues, we felt like we needed to do something with that. 79% of key leaders thought that it was a major issue. 92% of service providers felt that it was an issue, and 67% of our faith-based. So certainly was identified as a need. And then even just as with our planning committee, we were hearing things of clients that got scammed out of $16,000. Somebody's best friend got scammed out of $30,000, her entire life savings, and even more. So we really, again, felt that it was something that we really wanted to do. So we gathered a planning committee, and we also collaborated with the Blair County Library System. So I want to thank them as well. Some of the folks, again, who were on our planning committee, I just want to give a thank to, and that is Jennifer Nisley and Heather Linsgold from the Blair County Library System in the Altoona Area Public Library, Marty Dombrowski from the Center for Independent Living, Amy Burns from NAMI, Donna Gordy, former Blair County Commissioner and active committee member on everything. Bethany Ritchie from PA Link, Jackie Harpster, a community member, and Pam Townsend from the Hope Drop-In. So those were some folks on our planning committee. And again, I really appreciate all of the time that they took to help us organize this event. Also, really want to thank our sponsors, obviously the Blair County Library System, PA Link, First National Bank, S&T Bank, and then Sam's Club is going to be providing some refreshments for our events that are going to occur tomorrow at Morrison's Cove Memorial Park. Again, really want to thank our vendors who are here. Also want to kind of give a shout out to Blair Senior Services. Not that anyone at any age can be scammed, but certainly we don't want our parents and grandparents to be as well. So really appreciate them being here. Just a couple of quick things before I turn it over to Connor. There are some refreshments in the back. Please help yourself to those. And, if you just get tired of sitting, please feel free to stand against the wall, walk around, just make yourselves as comfortable as possible. Again, we have a variety of handouts from our vendors. Again, if you're not familiar with the Healthy Blair County Coalition, ours was kind of the center table there. And we have a couple of different events that we are going to be doing, different kind of trainings. So if you didn't get a chance to stop at our table, please do so. There's also index cards available at your table, and so we would love to hear your comments. If you want to write those down, any questions that you might have, or ways that we could have done this different, we'd love to hear that. Also, again, if you are not familiar with Healthy Blair County Coalition, you want to be on our Constant Contact newsletter, or you want to know some things that we're doing, just put that down on the index card, just your name and an email, and we'll make sure that you are aware. We don't send things out on a daily or weekly basis, so you won't be bombarded with a lot, but we just want to be able to share some of the things that are happening. And the last one is that we are doing this again tonight from 6 to 8, and then again tomorrow from 2 to 4 and 6 to 8 at Morrison's Cove Memorial Park. So, if you've got some friends or family or colleagues or whatever that, you think would benefit, just tell them to stop in. If they don't have time to register, don't worry about it. We just love to have them here. So again, thank you all for coming. And I really want to, again, introduce and thank Connor Farrar from the Pennsylvania Pennsylvania Office of Attorney General. He has been really great about fitting into our schedule to do this, and then just some of the topics. So we brainstormed, what did we think were the most important topics? And he was like, sure, I can do that. I can help you with that. So thank you so much, Connor, for being here. Really appreciate it.
Yeah. Well, thank you all. Thank you. Thank you, Colleen, for the introduction and for the all of the work, really, from the dozens of folks who made this happen. I know Healthy Blair County Coalition and the library system as well. Special thanks to them and all the folks who really made this happen over the course of several months. So a lot of planning, a lot of work, many meetings, I'm sure went into this, and also a thank you to the vendors who are participating. I believe this is a really important topic, and if you're not familiar with the Office of Attorney General, the Pennsylvania Office of Attorney General, we are the chief law enforcement agency for the state. So Attorney General Michelle Henry is the chief law enforcement officer representing the Commonwealth in court and prosecuting individuals on behalf of the Commonwealth. So we have a variety of regulatory and criminal investigative mandates here in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. One of those things is to protect consumers. So we do operate a Bureau of Consumer Protection, which is focused on dealing with issues such as scams, whether it is online, in person, a contractor or an online retailer, or anything that might be happening in a community. If you believe that you have been victimized, or if somebody that you know or care about has been victimized, we're certainly one of the agencies that you can reach out to, and we will help try and facilitate that problem as an individual reports it to us. So I've left just at the beginning of the presentation contact information for the Bureau of Consumer Protection. You can reach us at this 800 number, and then also at scams@attorneygeneral.gov. But generally, I think it would serve the conversation to give you all an understanding of what the real scamming environment and organized crime environment related to financial frauds looks like overall, both here in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania and nationally. So that's kind of how I'll start this conversation. But if any members of the audience or any of the vendors have any questions throughout this process, feel free to take a note of those on the index cards that have been provided, and I will leave about 30 minutes at the end of the 2-hour period to answer those questions. So hopefully we'll get through all the material. I know there will be a lot. If there are questions along the way, I'm happy to try and answer them, but I would like to focus on having those at the end in the last 30 minutes to be respectful of everyone's time. So with that, let me pull up the second PowerPoint now that you have that contact. Great, okay. So you might be wondering how I ended up here. I am a education and outreach specialist primarily, so it is my job to conduct presentations like this one as a full-time job. So I travel around the Commonwealth a lot. I'm responsible for about 14 counties, but I also help in the Philadelphia area as well with presentations for schools, community organizations, nonprofit groups, legislative offices, really any organization here in the Commonwealth that wants to hear from our agency and wants us to speak to some of the health and public safety issues that are affecting their communities. Those are groups that I will work with to put on presentations like this one, but also actually provide General Assembly content for schools, smaller format question and answer sessions with seniors in care facilities, that kind of thing. So if there's any content that is covered in this presentation, if you have an organization that you work with and you'd like to have us come out, please feel free to get my attention at the end of the presentation after we've gone through the questions and answers, and I can get you my contact information if you'd like to hear from us. But I guess to get on to the meat and potatoes, really, of the presentation, we'll be focusing on how to protect yourself from financial crime. In order to really frame that discussion, I want folks to have an idea of how big this industry is for criminals that are potentially defrauding us as victims of these crimes. This number comes from a FTC report that actually was comprised of about 2.1 million frauds in the year of 2020. So this is the number, $3.3 billion, which is actually individually frauded from individuals that year. So this was the amount reported It is estimated that the number, however, is much higher because we don't necessarily receive all reports. Law enforcement agencies don't receive every report and cannot, vet every single report to come up with a specific number. But $3.3 billion is a lot of money. That was 3 years ago. We are seeing this number go up every single year. The categories in which individuals are targeted and the methods by which criminals steal from folks, unfortunately, are changing over time, which is how these folks stay in business as law enforcement does try to adapt to deal with their tactics. They are always trying to look for new ones. So it's a large industry. Obviously, there's a huge incentive on behalf of criminal organizations and individual actors to try and defraud folks. They'll do that by a variety of means, and the individual victim is going to look different every time. There are broad categories that we can use to sort of demonstrate the scale and the impact of this issue on different demographics within the country. So what I did was I broke down some FBI data that I pulled offline and just brought about 4 demographic categories together just to give you an illustration of what this might look like for a victim of a certain age. So for this bracket, the the 19 and under bracket, so teenagers and young children as well. The average amount lost by that individual in a scam that was reported to the FBI would have been about $180. The means by which that criminal got in contact with the victim were through social media requests, so digital messages and instant messages over social media applications, and then also comments on YouTube videos and other social media platforms, video games, chat bots, text messaging scams, that kind of thing. The typical way that individual was then defrauded, that young person was then defrauded, was either through a peer-to-peer payment messaging system. So think of Zelle or Cash App or Venmo or PayPal or any of these other online applications, Apple Cash as well. Any application that allows you to send and receive funds directly. Typically, these are smaller transactions that you might use to split a meal with a restaurant at a friend, or a parent might give to a young person so that they can go to the mall or wherever. And these are typically the ways that criminals are getting access to funds within this demographic. Another methodology that criminals will use is actually to recruit individual young people within this category to either layer a financial transaction in a form of money laundering to sort of conceal large numbers of transactions, for example. So let's say a criminal steals $10,000. They want to bury that $10,000 in $100 transactions, so it's difficult for law enforcement to find. They will utilize younger people who may not be looking at accounts, or they'll utilize accounts that are not used as frequently in order to try and move that money. The second bracket that we looked, or at least that I looked at for example's sake, these are obviously not uniform. Skipping a decade here, skipping the 20s, because I didn't find the 20s to be particularly different, notably from the teens and the 30s in this case. So you'll see that the average dollar value went up. The average person victimized within this demographic, which I happily sit in at the beginning of the the age range, was about $250 lost. This is by no means representative of what could happen or the worst case. It's simply the average. Robocalls and text messaging scams sort of become the majority of the triggers for this demographic. So you're not seeing as many scams take place over social media, which is not to say that they are not happening, but rather that the average person is going to be victimized by a criminal through a robocall, through a text message about a bank account issue, or that kind of thing that is designed to target their specific financial circumstances. And that's something that I will come back to throughout the presentation, is that individual demographics are being targeted through the means that they go about their daily financial lives. So if you are banking on a mobile app, if you're banking over the phone, if you're banking in person, there are scams that are designed to victimize you, the individual consumer, through all of those processes. While it is unfortunate that we're seeing more internet fraud, there is still real sort of in-person physical frauds taking place to target demographics that are not using simply the internet to do their financial transactions. So some of the tactics that were involved to actually get people to click on a link or to answer an email or a text message were, for example, reward schemes where they will say an individual won a sweepstakes contest, for example, or they won tickets to a concert or won a voucher for a vacation. Anything that will grab the attention of the consumer in order to get them to click on a link, open an email, respond to a phone call or a text message is a strategy that a scammer is going to use because it A, grabs our attention, B, requires us to do something, and then C, we actually, in most cases, have to compromise some amount of personally identifiable information in interacting with that organization that's targeting us. So it might be a credit card number, it might be an email or an address. Anything that they can get from you that is personally identifiable is something that they're going to be looking for, and they're going to do that in a variety of ways. As we move up the sort of the age scale into the 50 to 59-year-old category, the average loss jumps significantly because, frankly, this is where we started to get into the demographics where folks are retiring. You know, this might be obviously an early retirement for most Americans, but the reality is, if you are in your 50s or 60s, you likely have just more money in your bank account than a 20-year-old might have straight out of college or high school. So we do see the dollar values of individual victims' monies lost increase in this bracket very quickly, and you'll see in the next bracket we go up another order of magnitude. So again, these are triggers that could be social media application messages or requests. It could be a bot, for example, that sends a friend request to thousands of individual users and then sends them a URL. And then that URL could download some sort of malware or ransomware onto a device, which is then used by criminals to compromise the person's data. So social media requests, chat bots, telephone scams, text scams, all of these things, are affecting every community, but you'll see certain ones affect more, specific demographics. Peer-to-peer payment messaging is also a major source of funds here that criminals will use to, exfiltrate money from someone's account. This can also be gift cards. So gift cards are a very, very sought after method of financial transaction for a criminal because they're very difficult for law enforcement to trace. Once a gift card has been purchased on someone's behalf and it exchanges hands, there's really nowhere to know, there's no way to know, where that gift card is going or what it's going to be spent on until that money is spent. So in terms of law enforcement getting those funds back for an individual, it can be very difficult. So we do often see some of these scams take place where they will request for payment for some service in the form of a gift card or through a payment processing application like Venmo or Cash App or Apple Cash or any of those. Then we get into the 80-plus category. This is where it really skyrockets in terms of the financial loss of individual victims. We see an average of $1,300 being the amount taken from individuals within this category. This is partially because there is a higher proportion of these individuals who may no longer have the cognitive ability to notice that this is happening. So we do see folks with medical disabilities that occur later in life being victimized by these things and it going for a longer period of time before it's noticed, for example. But then also, frankly, these are folks who will have more money because they're retired, potentially because they're living on a fixed income where more money can be, unfortunately, withdrawn from these victims by criminals. The primary way that, individuals above the age of 80 are going to be contacted for a crime is by robocall. So we all get these calls every week. I'm sure, I know I've gotten several today alone, but whether it's a car extended warranty scam or a grandma or grandpa scam or a IRS scam, Medicare, Medicaid, Veterans Affairs, whatever it might be, these are sort of the triggers that are used to target these demographics and steal money from them, unfortunately. And it is not necessarily just individual financial transactions that are occurring where somebody takes $1,000 out of a bank account. It could also be a case of identity theft. And I'll get more into identity theft as we continue the presentation. But really, the trouble with identity theft is that once your social security number has been compromised, it's very difficult to get back to a state of financial safety where we don't think that that information is being compromised in the future, because you simply can't update a social security number. So once it's out there and available for criminals to use in your name, there is always some level of risk in the future that that number could be compromised again and could be used to open a new account fraudulently. So again, as I go through the presentation, I'll talk about some ways to deal with that, and I'll also describe the identity theft problem in more detail. But just looking at identity theft as sort of an issue, you'll see, I don't know how legible this slide is for you all in the back, but you'll see that in 2001 there were just over 250,000 a year reported cases of identity theft. That was 2001. 2020, 4.7 million. So this is becoming a much larger problem. There was a huge spike here in 2019 to 2020. I need to actually look at the data and see what the cause for that is, whether it was better reporting or if there actually was a significant spike as a result of this, or if it was a larger data leak that led to this reporting. Either way, you can tell over the last 20 plus years, this has become more and more of a problem. The reason for this, primarily, is this information is able to be shared between criminal organizations online now. That wasn't necessarily the case prior to 2001. So the longer this information is out there, the longer criminals have access to even legally obtained data about their victims that could be obtained through an advertiser or through a social media network, for example. This information, namely your social security number, your full personal name, your full legal name rather, your address, your phone number, your personal email, where you work, where you went to school, all of this information is now online and accessible to criminals in a way that it was not before. So while I'm not going to tell folks that it is not safe to use the internet for banking or for social media, it's important for us to remember that the information that we place online is there permanently. There's no getting rid of it, there's no deleting it, there's no taking it down without there being some record somewhere of that information having been shared. So this graph indicates the sort of the reporting rate for these individual crimes, where it is more likely for an individual. So actually, so you see, actually, it is much. You see a sort of a sliding scale in terms of the amount of money that's lost by an individual victim. So on the far left of the, or on the far right of the stream, your right, my left, you'll see the sort of the 19 and under demographic, where you've got about $180 loss, and then on the sort of the other far side of that, you see the 80 and over category with a $1,300 loss as an average. But the yellow line actually is the line where individuals report those losses to law enforcement. So if we can infer that 50% of individuals under the age of 20, let's say, are reporting that these losses are happening, and only 18, 19, 20% of individuals over the age of 80 are reporting that these things are happening, it can be very difficult for us to actually get an idea of what this problem looks like for an individual consumer. Maybe it's a gut feeling, just my thoughts on it, and having talked with many communities across the state, I think that the reporting numbers are inflated a bit. I think that individuals are under-reporting when these crimes are taking place by a significant margin. So I think actually the dollar loss rather for individuals in these categories is all a lot higher than the data would show. So I do think that there are cases where we are, for example, having small transactions being defrauded $15 a month, $10 a month, maybe even $100 a month for many, many, many months in a row on behalf of an individual victim, who then realizes it later and then never reports it and fixes whatever caused that problem. So in dollars and cents, though, for a criminal, that adds up to be quite a lot of money. So you can kind of see the scale of this problem. This slide might be a little difficult to read. I often share this presentation over Zoom or something like that, so it's easier to see. So this might be a little too too small for you all to see in the back. But the top types of identity theft in Pennsylvania specifically are credit card theft, identity or document theft, loan or lease fraud, fraudulent government documents, and then phone or utilities fraud. So those would be where an individual is receiving, false utility bills for somebody else's address or something like that. So there's multiple different types of identity theft. We are sort of ranked 28th in the country in terms of how prevalent this is within our population. So this is on a per capita basis, for example. So how many people per 100,000 individuals are victimized by identity theft? We rank about 28th in the country. So not great, not terrible. But an important thing to remember about Pennsylvania specifically is that we do have one of the oldest general populations in the country. I think we are the 5th oldest or 4th oldest state in the country. We have a large proportion of the state's population that are seniors. So that's something to be wary of within your community when these things are affecting many, many people. Criminals will target communities that they believe to be more likely to be victimized. So living in a state with a larger population, your zip code might be a higher target. You may receive more phone calls, you may receive more emails, you may receive more text messages of this type that could be a problem. So I've got a short YouTube video here. I don't know if anyone has seen the movie Catch Me If You Can, and it's actually come out recently that maybe some of the things even Frank here, who you'll hear from briefly, have said are not true, but I think it even illustrates the point better if that's the case. I won't offer an opinion about that or not. But I think this is a good piece of advice, and it's stated pretty succinctly, so we'll just listen to this for a moment. Hopefully this cooperates.
And that stood for confidence man. They were well dressed, they had a great vocabulary, they were a very likable person, and that's how they swindled you. But they had to do that one-on-one. They had to be standing in front of you. The difference today, 50 years later, is that they're in the kitchen with a cup of coffee on their laptop in their pajamas in Moscow. And that gets very scary. So they will take you for everything you have without any compassion whatsoever. Most people know me from the movie Catch Me If You Can. Between 16 and 21, I impersonated an airline pilot, a doctor, a lawyer. I wrote $2.5 million worth of bad checks. I was arrested when I was 21 years old. When I was 26 years old, the government offered to take me out of prison on the condition I go to work with an agency of the federal government for the remainder of my sentence. I agreed. I've been working with the FBI now for about 43 years. In every scam, no matter how sophisticated or how amateur, there are 2 red flags. The first red flag is at some point I'm going to ask you to give me money. And the money has to be immediate. You have to give me a credit card right now on the phone. You have to give me a bank account number. You have to stay on the phone with me and go down to Walmart and buy a Green Dot card, and then when you get through the cashier, read me the number on the back. Everything is this moment, and the minute anyone's asking you for money and it's immediate, that's a big red flag. A perfect example of these romance scams that have doubled in the last 2 or 3 years. You never met him. You don't know who he really is, and now he's asking you for $35,000. The other red flag is at some point in the conversation, I'm going to start asking you personal information. So I may call and say, I'm from your bank's fraud department. We detected fraud on your credit card. And I'll have a whole conversation with you. But then before it ends, I'll say to you, now, Mrs. Jones, just to make sure you actually have your card in your possession, can you turn it over and read the 3 digits to me on the back of the card? So I'm going to ask you for a social security number, a date of birth, personal information. You didn't solicit that call. You didn't solicit that email. You have no idea who's on the other end of that phone. You never want to part with any money or any information. Those are the 2 red flags, the most important red flags to remember.
So that's just a short video. I'll talk a lot more about the fact that an individual, when they are reaching out to us, is going to be in urgent need of whatever information they're asking for. It really is the methodology that underpins all scams. There is a sudden need for information. There's a sudden need for you to update your account. There's a sudden need for you to send money somewhere. They're always trying to catch you off guard. They're hoping, and they're really playing sort of the law of large numbers, really, when they're calling 10,000, 10 million people, that they're going to catch somebody when they're having a bad day. They're going to catch you when you are distracted, when something in your relationship isn't going well, when other financial issues are in your life, when you're sick. Regardless, they don't care. There's not a lot of, there is no compassion that goes into this behavior. They are simply looking at you as a payday. It is not about you. It is not about what's going on in your life. If anything, it is a benefit to criminals that you are distracted, and they are betting on that. So I think Frank puts it pretty succinctly. They're looking for information. They want it as quickly as possible, and they're going to lie to you to get to it.
Back 50 years.
We don't want to do that. We don't want to repeat it. So this industry in general is expanding. It doesn't just affect individual consumers. It also affects corporations, government agencies, nonprofits, whomever that we're thinking about. This can take the form of business email frauds. It can take the form of data breaches. A number of years ago, Experian was hacked, one of the largest credit reporting agencies in the country, and over 100 million individual individual social security numbers and contact information was compromised during that Experian hack. I believe that was in 2018 or 2019, maybe even longer ago than that. I could be dating myself saying it was that recently, but the point stands. Larger organizations are perfectly susceptible to these crimes as well. Name a Fortune 500 company that hasn't had a cybersecurity incident, and I'll give you $5 because they all have. So every single company, every single organization is dealing with the consequences of this industry of fraud and cybercrime, and it affects things like service. A number, I guess, actually last year there was a large denial of service attack that hit a pipeline company in the southeast U.S. It brought down the pipeline for a number of days, and it impacted gas customers. It was all over the news. It was likely a state-directed action from an adversary country that was looking at U.S. infrastructure, how they could probe our. Excuse me. Sorry about that. Frank doesn't want to stop talking. So these things happen. They can be, directed by an adversary country, for example. Think North Korea, Iran, China, Russia, whoever, Venezuela, whatever. It might be. They're looking for, the access to infrastructure data. They're looking for access to corporate intelligence, patents, research from major research institutions, universities, large companies, that kind of thing. So that's what's affecting corporations, but obviously corporations have customers. And if you, for example, shop with Walmart or you shop with Amazon and one of these companies is targeted and your data is compromised as a result of this, that can be a problem for you. So it's important to remember that it's not always your own individual actions, and it's not only your own access to the internet or what you're doing on the internet that could lead to one of these frauds occurring and being victimized. It could be something that is completely out of your control. That's kind of the sad part about this industry, is that it has sort of a follow-on effect for individual customers when a corporation, for example, doesn't have good security practices, or they are compromised as a result of a breach or malfeasance on behalf of an employee, or frankly, what in cybercrime is more often the case, just human error. The vast majority of cybercrime occurs because somebody did something wrong. They followed the wrong process. They had a password that was outdated. They accessed a link they shouldn't have accessed. And it just comes down to human error. So that's a very difficult thing for corporations and businesses to manage when it comes to providing access and privilege to certain data for their employees. And again, it has a follow-on effect for the consumer. So it can be a difficult thing. Email account compromise is a big thing as well. They will look for access to an email account, because if you have banking data or financial data coming into an email, that's certainly something they'd like to have access to. And in addition to that, they'd also like to know who you communicate with so that they can potentially use your account to compromise other accounts. Malware, scareware, ransomware are all versions of computer virus, computer programs that are written to compromise individual devices. Ransomware specifically is something that's growing in popularity among criminals because what they can do is send you a link, have you download a program. That program then takes over the operating system of your computer or your phone or whatever it is. And then next time you boot that phone up, you'll have a pop-up that says, oh, you have an update, a critical update you need done. Send us $200 to renew your subscription. We'll give you access to your phone back. This is happening quite frequently now. It's called ransomware. So if you are clicking on a link from a business you don't do work with, or a phone number that you aren't familiar with, anything like that that contains a URL which then begins a download, you are possibly exposing yourself to ransomware, to spyware, to malware, all of these things, these nasty viruses that are out there. So it's important to be wary and kind of know what the threats are. These things are not typically going to affect the average consumer. You're either going to get really unlucky and just be in the wrong place at the wrong time and click on a bad link. But things that are more complicated are usually targeting a business or a larger organization. So that's worth thinking about if we, for example, do go to work, on Monday, or we do have access to information that we're being careful about, not just our own personal information, but any organization that we represent. So in order to protect ourselves from identity theft, one of the main things that I recommend for folks is that you should obviously read your monthly bank statements and credit card statements. Another part of that I can recommend is signing up for text messages and email alerts for those accounts. This could be a banking account, it could be a checking account, it could be savings, it could be an investment account, 401k, whatever it is. You should really have as many alerts set up for your accounts as possible. So email, text message, phone, whatever it looks like for you, whatever's easiest for you to manage. You want to know every time money goes in and every time money goes out of an account that you control. So I highly recommend that for everybody. Text messages, I think, are the easiest way to do it, but it's up to you. As long as you're keeping an eye on that data, keeping an eye on how your accounts are doing, how they're being used and what for and where. Because it is typically the case that these frauds will occur. They won't wipe out your bank account in one day. They will use it sort of as a piggy bank that they'll take a quarter out of every month or every week for as long as they can. And then when they realize that you've noticed the problem, then they'll try and take everything. So it can be the case that these things go unnoticed for some period of time. Another thing I will always point out to people where it doesn't necessarily cross over into the framework of being illegal, but rather just a subscription service, for example, that we've signed up for, either as a free trial or something like that, that is just on a recurring billing cycle that we don't use. It's important to know when those things are happening, because it might be $15 a month for Netflix. It could be $30 a month for a charity that we signed up for 5 years ago and haven't heard anything from since. And that withdrawal could be happening every single month from our accounts. So do yourself a favor, sign up for text alerts, email alerts, phone alerts, whatever you can do that makes sense for you to make sure that you know every time something happens in an account that you have control of. Obviously, never give your credit card number or your social security number over the phone. I know some people do still shop on the phone. They'll call into QVC or some other sales service, and they'll purchase something over the phone. We don't want to recommend that. It isn't necessarily very easy for you to identify that you're talking to the right person over the phone. That is something easier to do online or in person. So I don't recommend, giving that information out over the phone. If you have to, call that number first. Don't respond to a call to your number. Go to the company's website or the organization's website, and if you have to provide that information over the phone, make sure that you're going to that website, verifying that you've called the correct number, and then providing that information. Because if you're receiving an inbound call, unfortunately, criminals can do what's called spoofing. Spoofing is the process of concealing a phone number and making it look like a different one. So you could receive a phone call that says it's from the Internal Revenue Service and it not be from the Internal Revenue Service, who actually, if you go to their website, they'll tell you we will never call you. However, I have received phone calls from the Internal Revenue Service. Those were spoofed calls by scammers. So it is possible for scammers to conceal what phone number or email address they're calling you or texting you from or emailing you from. So just be careful and proactively go to that website, figure out what their appropriate contact information is, and then you reach out to them if you have to provide that. I do recommend that you review an annual copy of your credit report. You can request 3 credit reports a year, one from each of the credit reporting agencies, Experian, Equifax, and TransUnion. Those 3 are the large credit reporting agencies that provide you with your FICO credit score and all of that. So they have access to all of your information. What they could do is, tied to your Social Security number, they will pull a credit report for you, which will have any transaction you've ever done in your life, whether it was an auto loan, a request for a line of credit, credit card, you open a bank account, whatever it is. Make sure that you're familiar with all of the active accounts on that report every year. I typically do it when I do my taxes, unless there's an issue. If I have had an issue, which I actually personally had one several months ago where I did have a couple fraudulent charges on a credit card I never use. I'll pull a credit report in that instance and review it after that happened. But typically, it's enough to do it at least once a year. When you're already doing your taxes anyway, I think that's a good time to do it. So I can certainly recommend that. And if you do believe that you have been victimized by identity theft, or if you think you've shared information that shouldn't have been shared, identitytheft.gov, which is operated by the Federal Trade Commission, is the resource that you'd want to use to deal with that issue. And I will share more information about that website as we go farther along. Another thing that can be worthwhile is also just shredding documents. You'll want to retain, tax records for a number of years, I believe 7 years, just in case there's an audit that occurs, anything like that. So you do want to retain copies of tax records for a period of time, but after that period of time has elapsed, you can safely get rid of those. And make sure that if you are shredding documents, you are either bringing them to a shredding facility, or you are using a bidirectional shredder, so a shredder that shreds across and down, so horizontally and vertically, not just straight down, because ribboned, paper can be taped back together and still be legible. So we do still have folks committing fraud via theft of mail. So again, make sure you're shredding documents that might contain personal information. And this actually also includes prescription pill bottles, which have your full name and address on them. I do recommend defacing, those prescription bottles as well, and also, frankly, for the purpose of avoiding home theft, because unfortunately, if we are on, for example, a pain management medication, and we're throwing those medications out, which could be addictive, folks may be looking for them, and if they believe you have access to that medicine, it could make you a target. So I do recommend, defacing those bottles, recycling them appropriately, that kind of thing, and shredding that information that could be potentially compromising. So money mules or smurfing, this is sort of a methodology that criminals use to layer or provide legitimacy to their their financial transactions. This isn't necessarily something that will affect the individual consumer, though it could, as it could be an example of having a relationship with somebody who'd be willing to scam us another way. But these types of scams typically occur when payroll theft or money laundering are occurring, where a criminal wants to conceal financial transactions in a way that makes them look legitimate by using individuals who could be construed as, just sort of a bystander or passerby, to make it a more complex financial transaction. So just be suspicious if someone's asking you to move money for them for any purpose, whether it's a business or a relationship online or someone in your real life, where an individual is asking you to move money for them or asking you to submit a job application for an organization you've never heard of or anything like that, where they want you to move money or move information for them on their behalf. That can be an instance where someone is trying to recruit you to move stuff so that they don't have to themselves. Again, this goes along with all of them. Don't provide contact information, personally identifiable information, or financial history, anything like that to someone you don't know. It should go without saying, but unfortunately, and especially in the case of romance scams, we often think that we have a better relationship or a more personal relationship with people that we meet online and are in constant contact with or consistent contact with online, but then ultimately we can't verify who they are and it becomes an issue. And like I said, folks are willing to lie to you. They're willing to develop a relationship with you. They're willing to develop a friendship over a shared hobby. It could be just a platonic friendship online, or it could be a romantic friendship or relationship online. Individuals are willing to lie about those things in order to compromise this data and this information about you so that they can steal. So just be careful. Another thing that I always have to point out when it comes to frauds is pyramids and Ponzi schemes. This is obviously an issue that's been in the news. I think of, multi-level marketing scams where individuals are encouraged to buy, a large amount of merchandise, and then they're told, oh, if you sell it to X number of people and get these people to also sell it, we'll be able to, make more money. That's sort of your classic pyramid scheme where an individual, let's say, buys $1,000 worth of a supplement, for example, and is told, hey, get your friends to sell to other people, and we'll all make money together. That's a classic example of a pyramid scheme. Bernie Madoff, who passed away a number of years ago, sort of ran the largest Ponzi scheme in U.S. history, and is sort of a headline example of this, where he encouraged millions of investors to contribute to his investment fund, which was ultimately just taking the money and doing whatever they wanted with it. So there was a perception on behalf of the victims where they believed that they were going to be making money from contributing to this account, and then ultimately they were victimized. We are seeing these types of things occur in the crypto market, so cryptocurrency market, where individuals are, for example, trying to do what's called a pump and dump, which is where they will basically artificially inflate the commodity that they're trying to sell, whether it's Bitcoin or Dogecoin or whatever is out there. They're trying to artificially inflate the price of that commodity so that then they can sell it later. This is also something that occurs in the stock market and is absolutely, in many cases fraud, but you as the individual consumer don't want to sort of believe the hype and send money in to purchase this asset or this commodity where it may not be worth that in the future. So just be very careful if you do, any investing. Never. What I always say to folks is, if they want to play the stock market, never play with anything you're not willing to lose. So if you think that you want to invest in something, if you think it's a great bet, if you think that that company is going to do great over, a very long period of time or even a short period of time, understand that you never know what can happen. There are many companies that look great on paper one day, and then something happens. As recently as this month, we're actually, I guess, a few months ago now with Silicon Valley Bank, where there was a pretty substantial issue that people probably didn't see on books a few weeks earlier. So anything can happen. Just be aware that when you are investing in the stock market, you are investing in these types of assets, and you're being very careful with that, and you understand that there is the potential to lose the investment. So if it sounds too good to be true, it very well could be. I had some duplicate slides in there. Sorry about that. So tips for avoiding market manipulation frauds are, again, don't believe the hype. Find out where the stock trades, independently verify claims, research whatever the opportunity is. Be aware that it could be really high pressure pitch. It could be someone trying to sell you this thing. You can think of, if anyone's seen the movie Wolf of Wall Street, they get folks on the phone and they say, oh, this is a really great bet. I just need $100 or $200 or $1,000 and we'll make you a ton of money. be very wary of those types of offers and pitches from folks that are trying to sell us anything. But this is particularly the case with market manipulation scams. As I mentioned before, I'm going to talk about romance scams sort of at length because I think it's something that is affecting more and more folks. It is a rapidly rising type of fraud that is occurring. It's really emotionally quite difficult for folks to wrap their heads around because these criminals truly will develop a multi-month or multi-even year relationship with an individual in order to steal from them. I do have two recordings from FBI case study of one of these cases, one from the victim and then one from a special agent who was investigating the case and ultimately ended up contributing to the prosecution of the individual who was charged. But I'll play both of these for you. It's a little upsetting, so apologies for that in advance.
Initially, he would read my wall, I would read his wall, we would post things. He would like things, I would like things. Then it got to, we would just share emails. We started sharing pictures. I knew that just based on the conversations that we'd had, that he was someone that I would like to meet. I felt a real soul connection with him right away. And we sang to each other, we prayed with each other. We talked about what happened at church on Sunday. There wasn't an immediate talk about getting together. He was trying to finish up a job in California, and he needed somebody to help finish that job up. And so I sent him. I thought about it long and hard, I prayed about it, and I've always been a very giving person. And I figured if I had money in the account, that I could send him some money, and he promised to have it back within 24, 48 hours. And I thought, could do that, no one would ever know, and I'd be okay. But, one thing kept happening after another. He'd need more money because he was coming in over budget. Things didn't get done on time. He needed a lawyer. He had to take a money loan and it needed to be paid back. Part of me thinks that he's gonna come through and pay me back what he owes me and, swoop in here, be the knight in shining armor. But it's just so absurd that there's a big part of me that doesn't believe that. And that is where this is all so pitiful, is because if he's a scammer, I've been so brainwashed. And I've lost everything. It's all I had. It's any inheritance that I could have passed on to my daughter. The loss of money was my future, and knowing that I wouldn't have to work, that I could just make it to the ripe old age of whatever and be perfectly comfortable. The loss that I've suffered emotionally, I think, has even been more traumatic. I can't even imagine a man, a person that could be this bad. So I think of him, I can't think of him that way. My mind keeps me from thinking of him that way because there can't be a man in this world that could be this horrible to have purposefully done what he's done to me. I don't want this to happen to anybody else. If they're real and if the love is real, they're going to want to see you as soon as possible. I mean, it's been 2.5 years, and I still haven't seen his face.
Romance schemes usually involve a perpetrator assuming an online identity, and it's for the purpose of tricking victims. So what they do is they search out vulnerable women, generally speaking. Men can be targets as well, but it's generally women, usually above the age of 50. Anyone is subject to this. If you're online, if you're using the internet, as long as you have money and you're willing to give it, then you could be a target. they'll hunt through these various networking sites and they'll find somebody who may be a good target, and they use what the victim has put on their profile page. So you have to be very careful about what you post, because they'll use that to manipulate the victim. And they'll develop a relationship very quickly. They'll try to endear themselves to the victims. They'll say whatever the victim wants to hear, and they will often propose marriage quickly. So they develop this intense relationship, and they do seek out people who may be divorced or widowed. So they're people who are vulnerable, who may be desperately looking for love. And again, they will manipulate that victim and they endear themselves and gain their trust, and then they'll start asking for money. The perpetrator will state that they have an emergency, that they need money for a job maybe overseas, that they have some type of medical emergency and they need funds. So they promise that they'll repay the victim as soon as the victim sends them money, but the victims never receive their money back. From what we can tell, these are usually criminal organizations that work together. And once a victim becomes a victim in that they send money, they will oftentimes be placed on what's called a sucker list, and their names and identities are shared with other criminals, and they will be targeted for future recruitment. I always tell people when we try to spread the word, if you don't know somebody, don't send them money. Try to research that person's profile that you're getting involved with, and try to do some due diligence. But we're all human, we all make mistakes, and I just hope victims who have fallen prey to this can learn and hopefully not enter into another scam. We have seen victims become victimized again, so I just ask that victims try to learn from the experience and try to share their experience with others so that other people can learn from their experience and not become victimized as well.
So obviously that's, it can be a really tragic story. I think every case of, this category is tragic. The level of someone's trust that has to be betrayed to get to that point where an individual could be victimized in this way is really astounding. And it's difficult for, I think, folks who haven't experienced this or haven't had somebody in their life experience it to say, how could you do that? How could you let that happen? You haven't met this person, or even if you haven't known them for very long. Why are you giving them access to this thing, to whatever this is, whether it's a joint account or, a credit card, or you're sending them money or whatever it is. How could you do that? And the reality is that these folks are willing to lie to you. They are willing to manipulate your emotions. They're willing to manipulate what you think is fair. They're willing to manipulate what you idealize as a relationship. Whether that is a partner that you idealize, or a type of relationship with that partner that you idealize. They're willing to do whatever they need to do to get the money, and that's a very hard thing as a victim to wrap your head around, is that this person who supposedly cared for you did something like this. But what I would caution folks is that this is something that can happen to anybody. We might think, hey, this is never going to be me for X, Y, or Z reason in your life. But the reality is that these things are done specifically to target individuals. They find you if you're on a dating website. They find you if you're on social media, and they target you with these things. Some of the ways that they target individuals are very simple. It could just be a message from a fake account on Instagram, on Facebook, on TikTok, wherever, where it's a fake account, but they message you and say, hey, we're interested in the same thing, and they start it from there. And it can evolve quickly. Whether it starts on a dating application or it starts on social media or wherever it starts, this is something to be very careful about, to be aware of, and particularly in cases where an individual does want to meet, if you are dating online or if you are meeting people online for whatever reason, whether it's romantic or not, make sure that you're doing so in public. Make sure that you have notified other individuals that you're meeting somebody you've never met before. Do everything in your power to be as safe as possible when interacting with people online, and then taking that relationship from offline to from online to sort of offline in real life, because these folks are out there. And this is unfortunately something that we see a lot from from the perspective of our child predator unit, which operates through the agency as well, where these tactics are also used to target young people. So it's something to be aware of. It's tragic and it's hard to talk about. But if anyone has questions about this, feel free to write them on the index cards. I can try and address them specifically. But I'll come back to this in a little bit more in a moment.
Actually, he would read my wall, I would read his wall.
Sorry.
We would post things.
Romance
He would like
games.
Oh boy, sorry. So again, never send money to anyone you have only communicated with virtually. If you're dating online, be careful. Do your research. Try and particularly find other accounts of this individual. So if they have a Facebook page, try and find a TikTok or a Twitter page or an Instagram page. If they have one social media platform, they probably have multiple. Try and find this person and make sure that they're not, for example, utilizing the same profile picture as another account. Because what these accounts will often do is they'll take stock photos or they'll take stolen photos from a compromised account and use them to create a fake new one. Make sure that you're, developing a relationship slowly, that you're sort of testing the waters, that you're making sure sort of everything is normal and is okay. And then be aware that this can still happen. Some people don't necessarily need to be lying about who they are to steal from a partner. So please just be careful and keep that in mind. Moving on to a different type of scam. This is a short video from the FDA, from the Food and Drug Administration, that deals with sort of miracle products, personal success stories, quick fixes for obesity or for sleep or depression or dietary issues or whatever it might be. This is just a short video on those. Yeah, so I think just there's no narration for that one. It's just a short video. I think the main takeaway from miracle products, things like that, is that you really want to talk specifically to a healthcare professional. Talk to your doctor. If you have questions about a medical product, whether it's a dietary supplement or weight loss program or nutrition program, anything like that that is making sort of substantial claims about either immunity or, again, weight loss or sleep or sexual health or any of that, make sure you're talking to a doctor about it. Talk to an actual medical professional. Don't believe the marketing at face value. I know there's 1,000 products out there, 10,000 products even, that claim they can do everything for you. Just make sure that you are utilizing your money in a way that is efficient and that you are doing so in a way that's healthy. And the best way to do that is to talk to a doctor. So please be careful with those. I'll also point out that a lot of these products are sort of involved in what could be construed as triangle schemes, or pyramid schemes, where, for example, like I mentioned, supplements, there are plenty of companies that sell supplements to people and then try and have those individuals sell them to others. So be wary of that. Again, the adage is always true. If it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. There's no such thing as a free lunch. I can keep giving you these guys, but they're all actually applicable with this stuff, so just be careful. So this is a longer slide. Sorry about this. You probably won't be able to really read this from where you are all sitting, but this is about non-delivery of merchandise. So, for example, there were plenty of retailers that popped up in the aftermath of the pandemic that were selling things like toilet paper and personal protective equipment, that kind of stuff. They then failed to deliver on it after an individual had gone to their website that they'd just set up, sent them money, and they said, "Hey, where are my masks? Or where is my toilet paper? Or where are my cleaning wipes?" Or whatever it was. Plenty of these merchandisers popped up in the aftermath of the pandemic, but it's important to remember that they're around all the time, and it's always a sort of ongoing battle between law enforcement and the service providers and the advertising companies to make sure that the organizations that are out there when you Google sales for something are legitimate, because unfortunately it's the case that anybody can register a new website, and if people click on the link and give the information and don't have anything delivered, it's always going to be a problem. So non-delivery of merchandise is something to be aware of. Really the best way to avoid this is to utilize sort of vetted, well-known merchandisers and retailers, so using Amazons and Targets and Walmarts and your local store. Whatever it might be, make sure that you either know that they have a physical location or it's a brand that you trust already. There are plenty of resources for making sure that a website is legitimate. The Better Business Bureau is a great organization when it comes to vetting organizations that could be out there operating in the retail market or wherever. So that's a great resource to use. That's the best way to protect yourself from one of these things. But things happen. We might want to try a new product that we can't find elsewhere. It might be from a company, for example, that just started producing a new product, whatever it might be. We see the ad on social media. We say, hey, that looks cool. I'll place an order. Well, 6 months go by and the order hasn't been fulfilled. That's where there starts to be a problem. So try and, again, utilize retailers and manufacturers and service providers and whatever it might be that have already been vetted and are understood to be out there and delivering stuff out there in the market. And be careful of websites that advertise deals, sales, 2-for-1 deals, whatever it might be. Anything that sounds like a really fantastically good deal on something, be wary of those websites, because at the end of the day, these companies, if they are selling these goods, have to make money somehow. So if it's a fantastic deal, almost too good to be true, it might be. So just be wary of that. And if you are dealing with a case of non-delivery of merchandise, that is actually something you can reach out to us about, or to local law enforcement if you'd like. But certainly report it if you really do believe that your information was stolen, and we can try and do something about it. So I'm going to leave the best practices for now, because I'm going to go to a different PowerPoint that talks about social media specifically, because I think it's worth having at least a brief discussion about social media. But I'll come back to sort of this idea of best practices in a moment once we've talked about that. Before we do that, though, I am going to share with you this quick video from identitytheft.gov, which is operated by the FTC. This sort of covers identity theft and what it looks like to send a report into the FTC. I hope. Let's see. There we go.
That can lead to identity theft. In today's connected world,
There we go.
personal information sometimes falls into the wrong hands, and that can lead to identity theft. It might start with an unfamiliar charge on your credit card. A business might not accept your check, or a debt collector might call you about a bill that isn't yours. You're not alone. Identity theft can happen to anyone. Stay calm. Visit identitytheft.gov to report it and get a personal recovery plan. Identitytheft.gov helps you create an identity theft report. This report proves to businesses that someone stole your identity and makes it easier to fix problems caused by identity theft. To create an identity theft report, you can file a complaint with the Federal Trade Commission and with your local police department. Identitytheft.gov guides you through each step of the recovery process. You can generate the letters and forms you need. Track your progress and keep detailed records of people you've talked to. No matter what your identity theft situation is, identitytheft.gov can help, because recovering from...
Oops. Well, you guys get the idea. Identitytheft.gov. It's a great website. It's very easy to use. I recommend it all the time. It is really the place you need to go if something like this happens. But in addition, though, you do want to file a local police report as well. And if you call our agency, if you call the Office of Attorney General, we will direct you towards local law enforcement to file that report. However, If you call us and you need that information, you don't remember the website, or you don't know how to get in touch with local law enforcement, you are welcome to call our agency and we can try and direct you and get you that information. So some examples of credit card, not credit card fraud, identity theft fraud are open credit cards in the customer's name. It could be a utility account that's been fraud. It could be a tax refund fraud. There were a lot of CARES Act scams where individuals were claiming benefits under the CARES Act during the pandemic in the name of other individuals. So those stimulus checks that went out, for example, there was a substantial amount of fraud related to those. But it's not just that specific government program where those types of frauds occur. They also occur with employee benefit trusts. For private companies, for government agencies, unions, whatever it might be, those things happen. Unemployment is also a large source of these types of fraud and occurs through identity theft, and then also medical care as well. So there's a lot of consequences for this. The impact, obviously, is that you could have a denial of credit. It's obviously emotionally challenging to deal with. It could result in a denial of medical care as a result of medical bankruptcy or anything like that. And then just the legal repercussions, stress, anxiety, and all of that goes along with this. So please remember that resource if you leave here, knowing nothing other than identitytheft.gov. That's what I'd love you all to leave here with. But there are ways that we can manage this, and there are resources for you. And an important thing in all of this really is that when you are victimized, when and if you are victimized by one of these things, it's not your fault. There is a perception among folks that, I've done something wrong, I'm embarrassed, this is a challenging thing in my life, I don't want to tell anyone about it because it's embarrassing or because it hurts. You've been victimized if this happens to you, and it's a crime. It's not your fault. Many people smarter than I up here, providing you all this information, have been scammed. And, it's happened to me before as well. I've had credit card information stolen as recently as a few months ago because, again, sometimes it's out of our control. Sometimes it is a breach at a website we've just happened to use before. So utilize the resources available to you, like identitytheft.gov, like our 800 number, which I will, again, leave up at the end of the presentation, or email us, or email a local representative or state senator. Those offices can also assist you in these cases if you do feel the need to reach out to somebody and you feel like you need help navigating this. Your representatives in both the State House and in Congress are great places to go and reach out to their district teams to do that. So there's a lot of resources available for you. And, we want to make sure that folks are actually reporting these things because law enforcement can help. So I'm going to move over to the other PowerPoint real quick. So this is our Social Media 101 presentation. This is something I typically give for schools. However, I think there's a lot of information in here that can try and help frame this conversation that we're having. You'll remember sort of at the beginning of the presentation that I gave you a few slides that demonstrated the increase in identity theft and other frauds that are occurring between 2001 and today. I believe that a lot of this is due to social media. It's due to the availability of information about ourselves and our family members and friends online. And social media is one of the ways that criminals are getting access to this stuff. So I'm not going to, go too deep into the details of this presentation because, again, it's typically targeted for schools and things that go on in schools, bullying and sharing of inappropriate images and that kind of stuff. So I'm not going to focus on it too much. I'd just like to talk about it as a way to frame maybe any questions that you might have going into the last half of this second hour. And that's that social media frequency is common. I mean, obviously, people are looking at their phones all day now. That was not true 20 years ago. In, 11 years ago when I was graduating high school, Facebook was really the one that, everyone was using. MySpace had sort of fallen off of the map and is no longer around. I don't believe MySpace still exists. If it does, someone let me know. But every year there's new social media applications that are out there. Obviously, they wane in popularity over time, and then a new one pops up to replace them. Really, the lasting ones have been YouTube, Facebook, Snapchat, Instagram, Twitter, and now TikTok. Those are the big ones. But there's a few others that I would point out, specifically because in the context of this discussion we've been having, frauds do take place here. Facebook has about 2.75 billion annual users. YouTube, just under that at 2.29. Facebook's actually falling. YouTube is increasing. WhatsApp, which is really used as a replacement for cellular service and text messaging in much of the world, is at 2 billion users annually. They are also owned by Meta, the company that owns Facebook, Instagram, and WhatsApp, as well as a number of other tech companies. So obviously, this is a lot of users that Meta has access to, or that Alphabet, the company that owns Google, has access to. Reddit has 430 million annual users all around the world. Discord, which is a voice over IP messaging and chat service, primarily or originally used for video game communities and now is increasingly being used for all sorts of things, is also rapidly growing in its users. Twitch, which is a streaming service that allows people to watch content online, whether it's video games or celebrities and influencers, creating content, talking with their audiences and fans. That's about 30 million users on a daily basis. So obviously the data is not uniform here, but it serves to show how often people are online. And again, we have the examples of sort of the victims of these crimes. One thing that I will point out to folks is that every time you log into an application, you do sign what's called an end user license agreement. This agreement is designed primarily to protect the copyright owner. A lot of people I've spoken with believe that these license agreements exist to protect the data of the individual, for example. Well, I'm unfortunately here to tell you that that's not the truth, or at least not primarily. A business has a profound incentive to keep hold of your data, which means if you've deleted something off of an application, for example, even though it might not be available on your device anymore, I can assure you that Facebook or Alphabet or whoever has retained a copy of that data so that they can use it. It may be anonymized such that it is difficult to trace back to you individually as the customer, but that data is still out there. That post you shared, that thing you liked, whatever it might be, those things are still out there, whether or not we've deleted them, because at the end of the day, that data is owned by the publisher, by the copyright owner that is publishing the application. So the example I always use in this presentation specifically is ripped from the Apple Terms of Service, the Apple Store Terms of Service. And I won't read this big block of text to you, but I will read the highlighted section, which contains this lovely clause. Your continued use of the iTunes Music Store following, so after hitting accept, will be deemed to constitute your acceptance of any and all such additional terms. Now, it goes on to say that any and all such additional terms can be updated whenever they feel like it. So every time you log into the Apple Store and utilize any application downloaded from the Apple Store, you have agreed to whatever data policy changes they've updated in this document on any given day. That is your relationship with Apple. That's your relationship with Google. That's what these documents look like. So everyone hits I accept. Everybody sort of knows the rules of the road when it comes to downloading applications. But I think it's an important reminder for every audience that I deal with that this data is out there, it is accessible, and it is not necessarily something that you, the individual consumer, have immediate control over. You can certainly request a copy, and many companies do have a policy to be able to provide you with that content, and many also provide you the option to delete your account or your profile. But again, that will often lead to the data being anonymized rather than fully deleted. So what that means is they'll take your name off of it, but you'll still retain the same demographic signature. So for example, if I had my Facebook account deleted, they might delete the name Connor Ferrara, but they would remember that a 30-year-old from southeastern Pennsylvania liked all of these things that I liked and shared and interacted with all of these accounts that I interacted with in the time that I had a Facebook account. So it's important to remember. It's just, I think, due diligence on my part to inform folks as much as I can about the privacy that they have when they are using apps online. And an important reminder that oversharing information online is something that we really want to avoid. So obviously social media exists so that we can share things with others. It exists so that we can, facilitate friendships and interests online, stay in touch with family members overseas. That's certainly one of the ways I use it. Staying in touch with friends from college. I went to college in New England, and I don't see many of the folks that I went to school with anymore, but I can still interact with them every day online if I wish to. So that's a brilliant thing. That's a wonderful thing about social media, and it is really useful to us. It provides a lot of utility. But if I'm oversharing, my address or where I work or what I'm doing on any given day or my credit card information or where I'm going on vacation and how long I'll be gone and where the keys to my house are, that starts to become a problem when we're oversharing that information to people who maybe shouldn't have it. So again, this information can be sold, it can be stolen in cases of data breaches from the companies that publish it. So just be careful. Make sure that when we're posting things about our personal lives, that we're not oversharing, that we're not providing people with more information than they possibly need. On that subject, privacy settings are very important. I think you should be able to do whatever you want on social media, as long as it's within the law, and share whatever you feel like you want to share. But consider reputational risk. Consider what it looks like to you and your loved ones when you are sharing things. Make sure that when you do share, whatever it is, that you were doing so in a way that maybe decreases the size of the audience. So I know everyone, loves getting likes and loves having people interact with their videos and the things they share, but does it really matter if those people who are interacting with it are strangers and we want to sort of live a more private life? I don't think so. That's my own personal choice, but I will point out that a lot of applications do have privacy settings where you can restrict the folks who limit or who see your content. So for example, on Facebook, there's a number of settings you can set. One is friends of friends only can see content. One is friends only can see content. One is specific people, so you select a specific list of people to see specific content, and then there's a setting for only you, the user, to see that content that's shared. That's a good framework, I think, at least from a consumer perspective, to be able to restrict access to certain information, photos, information about us, about our loved ones, and whatever it is that's going on in our life. But be aware of that and try and use those privacy policies where you can, and be familiar with them. Yeah, every time you download a new application, I do think it is worth reading the privacy policies of the company that publishes them. They all usually have a tab in the settings that go over their privacy policies, who they share their information with, and all that sort of stuff. I think it's informed. It's a form of being informed about the products and services that we have in our lives. And if you disagree for whatever reason with those privacy settings, there's probably a competitor to that company that's out there, or you can evaluate whether or not it's really even worth using that program to begin with. So the last thing I'll say about social media is that when it comes to avoiding reputational risk, please remember just the context and perception of a post or something that we share. Obviously, we want to create communities that are helpful and not hurtful. So, remember the context and of whatever we're posting. Remember how it's going to be perceived. Expect that it'll be around forever, like I've talked about. Be cautious, use those privacy settings, and then set high expectations for ourselves and others. One of the reasons I mention this specifically is because it is often the case that when people feel isolated, they are more susceptible to scams. When they feel like they have been isolated from a community that they care about, they feel bullied, they feel rejected, that's when they can be susceptible to these things. So even if it's not necessarily just about what we can individually do to set high standards for ourselves and make sure that we are keeping ourselves safe, part of this is also about keeping our communities safe. And I think that starts online with how we start conversations and continue to have conversations with one another. With that, I'm going to go to our sort of privacy best practices and tips that I can give you that you can hopefully implement in your life. And the first one is really use security software. I can't emphasize that this is important enough. There are plenty of products that are out there that can do this. I can't recommend a specific one, but there are many options out there that I think are worthwhile and worth researching, and many of which are very affordable. Avoid phishing emails. Try and, if you are receiving communications from anybody that either sounds too good to be true or is asking for information that either they otherwise would have. So for example, if a medical provider is reaching out to us and asking for account information, or our bank is asking us for our social security number, something like that where you kind of say to yourself, shouldn't you already have that? That's when maybe a red flag goes up and we don't share that information. So avoid those types of scams. I do highly recommend the use of a virtual private network when we are, for example, on an open Wi-Fi, like here in the conference center, because when you have a device connected to an open network, that device is visible by other devices on that network. What a virtual private network allows you to do is conceal that activity. So if you are at a coffee shop, or you're at a convention center, or you're at a train station or an airport, wherever you are where you are doing, or a library, importantly, if you're at a library and you're doing your taxes, or you're at a library and you need to print a business document because you don't have a printer at home, it's worthwhile to have a VPN to make sure that the things that you're doing on that network are not visible to other users. Because unfortunately, it is the case that nowadays criminals will go to a coffee shop or an airport or a bus station that has free public Wi-Fi. They'll post up with a laptop. They'll get an RFID reader, and they'll sit in that facility and look for devices that connect to them. And they will attempt to compromise those devices when they identify them. So having a VPN allows you to avoid some of that danger. It also helps you, for example, when you are shopping online, concealing your location for whatever reason. If you care about your privacy, VPNs are a great tool. Obviously, lock up your network devices so nobody wants to have their phone stolen. That probably goes without saying, but it's a good reminder. If you do have a device stolen, be aware that until that device is wiped and has a new user, your data that is stored on that phone or that computer or whatever it might be can potentially be compromised. That's an important reminder to also have passwords on those devices. So I know it's sometimes inconvenient and we don't want to have a password on a phone or on a computer because we just want to open it up and get to doing whatever we've got to do. Please have a password. And if you have a password, please change it frequently. Make sure it's not password 123. Make sure it's actually a difficult password to guess, or use a password keychain or other program that allows you to store those passwords and generate new ones. So A, you don't lose your data, and B, your data is kept secure in case of theft. I mentioned before, read privacy policies. That's important as well. I think it's just a due diligence thing that we can do as consumers to make sure that we're utilizing products and services that we care about and that we agree with. So privacy policies are part of that. When it comes to reporting things that are concerning, whether you think it's a scam or if it's a hateful speech or comment, whatever it might be that's posted on a website, or if you think somebody's being threatened, for example. This is a conversation I have to have with students a lot. If you think somebody's being threatened, please report these concerns to either the company or to law enforcement if you feel you have to. And often cases with Facebook, with Instagram, with TikTok, you can report content that you believe to be a scam or you believe to be hateful or whatever. You can report it directly to that service. They'll create a customer service report and they can potentially take it down because of that. The reason I say to do this is because if you think something's a scam, like I said, we want to catch these folks. We don't want this stuff out there. The best way to do that is for individuals to report. So anyway, so the last few things there were specific to students. But I think with that, I mean, we've got about 25 minutes remaining. I want to provide anyone who has questions with the opportunity to ask them, and so that we can get into that if there are any. But I really want to thank you all first and foremost for coming out, for Healthy Blair County Coalition for putting this event together in the Blair County Library System. Again, I really appreciate you all being here, and if there's any questions, I'm happy to take those now. Yes.
I came in from Paris, I landed in Washington, D.C.
Yeah.
Turned my phone on and plugged it in. And by the time I got from Washington, D.C. to Pittsburgh, my Facebook account was gone.
Really?
The other person
Yeah.
had taken it over, taken my pictures off
Yeah.
and everything. When I called, when I talked about the Facebook, it was like, well, we really can't do too much about that.
Yeah.
And I now have 3 Facebook accounts because 3 of them have been compromised.
Okay.
So I'm off of Facebook, obviously.
Yeah. Right.
But why is Facebook allowed to leave that information out for won't?
Yeah. It's a great question. So if anyone didn't hear, a Facebook account was stolen. There's now 3 sort of fraudulent accounts that are out there in your name. Facebook has they don't have an obligation to delete those accounts, unfortunately. If you've identified them as fraud, they're not they're not like a government agency where they have a social security number to go with you and your account number. So from their perspective, they say, oh, this is just another user. For them, you could argue that the relationship they have is just that they've got 3 new customers now. They've got 3 new accounts that are interacting with folks and they're selling the data. So that's one of the things that it is frustrating with this, is because we put so much of our personal lives on these accounts, it becomes sort of an intimate expression of who we are. And when that information is stolen, we go to a social media company or whoever and say, hey, this is my life, and why aren't you doing something about it? And the unfortunate reality is that they don't have to. I wish I had a better answer than that, but they're a profit-driven company, and while they obviously have a reputational risk of allowing fraudulent accounts to be out there, they've also got, like I shared, 2.7 billion users, and they maybe don't have the resources to investigate every one of those reports. So that sort of poses a question. What do we think is an appropriate amount of our lives to share online, and what are we willing to risk by doing that? I don't know that there's an easy answer, which is, I think a good reason to be careful with what we do share, because that kind of thing can happen. Because then, maybe a friend you haven't spoken with in some time gets a message from one of those fake accounts thinking it's you, which is usually why they do this, is, they'll steal someone's identity in order to then contact other people that they're connected with, because they're trying to establish that initial level of trust so that you'll communicate with them. So it's a really challenging thing. The best thing I can recommend doing is, if it continues happening, it could be something on a device, for example, that's been compromised, or an email that's been compromised. So I would recommend updating your email. It's usually an email or a phone number. When an account with the same company is compromised multiple times and you've created multiple accounts, that's usually because the email you're creating the account with has been compromised, or there's some other way for them to get in and verify, that they've got access. So I would try and update your email, and then also I would recommend, any devices that you use, try and use an antivirus software and make sure that you get your computer checked out, because it does create a problem when we've got someone impersonating us online. That can be a real challenge. I'm sorry you went through that. That's frustrating.
Young lady offers all kind of birthday presents to all kinds of people that are very personal.
Yeah.
So it's kind of really been a hard thing in my life to,
I'm sorry to hear that.
yeah.
Thank you for sharing. I appreciate it. It's tough. I really feel for folks that deal with it. I've had to delete a Facebook account in the past and create a new one, just because I think it was compromised, and I didn't want my photos being shared. I didn't want someone messaging someone on my behalf, really, for the purposes of scam. So it does happen, and that's why when we're using these services, you want to be, again, careful with how we're using them and what we're sharing on them. Any other questions? I'll go here and then, yeah, I'll start with you. No. Okay. Yeah.
When you're talking about credit card withdrawal thing,
Yeah.
so as long as I make the call, like I had your subscription thing on my credit card.
Yeah.
I don't even know what this is.
Okay.
I put it on my credit card, and they gave me, and everybody's overseas now, so you're like.
Yeah. Sure. Yeah.
As long as I'm calling the number, because they always ask.
Yeah.
And then they can pull it up, and then I know.
Right. What I would say is, so long as you are calling the number that's provided on their legitimate website, you're fine providing them whatever they ask for. Yeah, or the back of the card. Yeah, if you're calling, if you're calling if you are doing the outbound call, and after having done that outbound call, someone asks for something, identifiable information so they can verify it's your account, that's perfectly fine to give them because they frankly need to do that to verify your account information and be able to, fix whatever the problem is. But if you receive the call yourself and that person says, hey, there's an account problem, we need you to provide your email or your social security number or whatever, that's when you hang up the phone and say, hey, I can't talk right now, click. Then you go find that organization online that supposedly called you, call them back and say, hey, did you call me just now? 99.99% of the times, they're going to say, no, we don't do that call. That's usually how that plays out. Sure. Yeah.
I think some years ago, I might have been hacked from I got a message from someone that was related to an what? So all I did though was change my password.
Yeah.
And I didn't
Great.
create a whole new
If nothing strange happened after you did that, that's probably fine. What will often happen when a password is compromised and you then update the password and then you go back and the updated password doesn't work, it means they've actually stolen additional information like your email or your phone number, which they're then using to authenticate your ID and prove to the provider, whether it's whether it's a social media company or a retailer or whoever or bank, that they are who they say they are, i.e. you. That means they've gotten some additional piece of information and are able to do that. If you update the password and nothing else happens, you're probably okay. But that's where I do caution folks to be careful with their email, for example. And what I personally do is I have multiple email addresses. I have an email address that I use as sort of a throwaway for spam accounts and for retailers, for newsletters that I sign up to, where I don't really need to hear back from them. I just need them to have an email to complete the process. And then I have a personal email that I share only with friends and family, and then I have another email that I use for work. I think that's a good policy, especially with services like Google. You can create as many emails as you need for free. The amount of information you can store on them usually varies based on the service, but you can still create emails for free. It is worthwhile having sort of a throwaway email that you can use for account recovery, or excuse me, not a throwaway email that you can use for account recovery, but a private email that only friends and family have that you can use in the event one of your other emails is compromised or an account is compromised. Because then hey, I don't log into this email that often. If it's being used, it's not me. Versus a Gmail account we give to every single advertiser we've ever interacted with online that has 10,000 emails in it. It can be challenging to find stuff in there, and it's also more likely to be leaked when data is stolen from a company. It's more likely that email you use all over the place ends up on one of these lists. I hope that answers your question. Sure. And then, ma'am, on the right, yeah.
Like locally, is there any money that's recovered from fraud?
Yes. So is money recovered from frauds? Short answer is yes. The longer answer is it's often very difficult. And when it does occur, it usually takes a long time. Particularly in cases where a debit account or checking account or savings account, a direct bank account number, routing number, account number is compromised. That can be very difficult for funds to be recovered because it's just cash out the door almost. Where a credit card is frauded, that's where we've got more room to be able to work with the transaction and say, hey, this wasn't this person. Let's assign it to another account, write it off, and then frankly, the credit card company or the bank, they're insured against that loss, and then they have their own fraud and loss prevention teams that will deal with it. Then it's not your problem, which is why I advise actually folks not use debit cards. I think it's in the Catch Me If You Can video. I can't remember whether or not it gets to that part, but utilizing a credit card over a debit card is usually the best option. So if you have that ability to use credit for an everyday transaction, please do so. Because if a debit card, for example, is stolen versus a credit card, the credit card company is obviously insured, and it's their money that's on the line. You haven't paid them cash yet to pay for that transaction. Debit card, you might as well have handed somebody, direct access to your bank account. So if you have to use, a card for any reason, Try and use a credit card. If you have to use cash, debit card last. If you absolutely have to use a debit card, which I understand many people do, if you don't qualify for a credit card or you're not comfortable with it, for whatever reason, if you have to use a debit card, try and use an encrypted payment service like Apple Pay or Google Pay or Android Pay to conceal that card. The way you do that is you sign up on your phone, you scan the card into the phone, and then all you do when you go to a point of sale machine is tap the phone to that point of sale device. That way your credit card, or rather your debit card itself, is not directly exposed in that transaction. It's encrypted. And that encryption is verified by the payment service company, which is how they're able to do that. So if you absolutely have to use a debit card when you're out about buying gas or buying groceries or whatever, try and use it behind one of those payment services like Apple Pay, Google Pay, or Android Pay. It can save you a lot of hassle. On that subject, actually, it's important to note that physical ID chip skimmers are out there in the wild, on gas pumps, on ATM machines, at retailers, things like that. What a credit card skimmer is just a small device that affixes to the front of one of those plastic scanners that looks exactly like the molding. You know, it might look like the credit card receptacle on a gas pump. It just molds right over the front of it, and then every time a customer swipes into that gas pump, their credit card information is being recorded. It doesn't interfere with the gas station's ability to process the payment, but it does also record your financial data. So those credit card skimmers are out there too, which is another reason to use a credit card over a debit card, or at least one of those payment services instead of a debit card, because we don't want those stolen. Yes. Yeah, they'll roll up at 3 a.m. when there's one sleepy attendant at the gas station, and go to the farthest pump away from the cameras, and take a screwdriver, and they're made. I could pull up some photos of them if folks are interested, but they are made specifically to fit specifically manufactured plastic moldings for those pumps. So they'll come a night or a week or a month before. Say, okay, what's the specific model number for this unit, and they'll order the one they need, and they'll take the real one off, and they'll put the fake one on there. They look. Yeah, I mean, in theory, anywhere they can gain access to the credit card reader, they would do it. So again, another reason to be careful when we're shopping out there, because these things can happen. And it's also, frankly, not always just somebody coming in from outside the business. Sometimes an employee or even an owner of a business could install one of these and be committing these types of frauds. So it's something to be aware of, and that's another reason to use credit cards and use sort of these payment solutions that are encrypted, because it mitigates that threat substantially. Yes, ma'am. Sure. Good question. So, when it comes to robocalls, why does the government, how does the government deal with robocalls? The short answer is that there are two do not call lists, a federal and a state do not call list. You can sign up for both. What that will do is exclude legitimate advertisers from calling your number. Of course. So what it is doing is excluding legitimate advertisers. What it's not excluding is individuals willing to break the law and go around the do not call list. What the government does and what law enforcement does is report numbers that are associated with scams and frauds to telecom providers. And then those telecom providers place those numbers on a list, which is why when you pick up the phone and you see scam likely, that means that number has already been associated with, with a scam. The problem is there is a delay. By the time a criminal creates a new number, when it's been associated with scams, and when the customer receives a phone call. Unfortunately, criminals are not limited to a specific number of phone numbers. So what they'll do is they'll just keep creating new phone numbers. So from law enforcement's perspective, we will always send numbers that law enforcement associates with scams to the telecom providers to add to those lists. But there's always going to be new numbers in circulation that are being used for that purpose. And because they're willing to, frankly, circumvent the do not call list, they don't care that they're breaking the law by doing so, you'll still receive the calls, unfortunately. It's not a perfect solution. I know that's one of the main questions I get asked when I do these presentations is, why isn't the do not call list working? That's a question for legislators and for the telecom industry to come up with a better way to manage that, but that's what we're working with right now. Right. No, I understand. I understand your frustration with it, but it's, how do we exclude? The policy question is, how do we exclude potentially scam numbers from circulation when we allow anyone to get a new number whenever they want? So that's the challenge. And I don't know. I don't personally know an answer to the question. But if it's something you care a lot about, I highly encourage folks to call lawmakers, their state and local government officials to deal with that issue, because it is a huge issue. Absolutely. Anyone else? Any questions? Even from our vendors in the back, by the way, you guys aren't excluded. I know I've just been talking to the folks up front, but if not, thank you all so much for the opportunity to be here and speak with you all this evening, or this afternoon rather. And if you have any questions, feel free to come up to me afterwards. If you need to reach out to the Office of Attorney General, either feel free to email me or give us a call at our 800 number. But again, thank you all for your participation, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your week. Thank you.